Okay, let's unpack this. Global perceptions of countries, especially their economic standing, well, they can shift dramatically sometimes over just a few years.
That's true.
And the stack of source material you've provided for this deep dive gives us a truly fascinating case study. India.
Hmm,
We have here a detailed look at the salient features of what's being called New India, but crucially, it also presents a vital counterpoint.
that's right. This material paints a picture that highlights significant changes, um, a sense of potential, and a transformation in how India is viewed on the world stage. It presents a narrative, really, of an economy on the rise.
Absolutely. So, our mission today is to go through these pages, cut through the volume of information, and extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight.
Get to the core of it.
Exactly.
Uh,
We want to understand the key features defining this new Indian narrative as presented in these sources, look at the specific government initiatives mentioned, and importantly, grapple with the underlying realities and persistent challenges that the material also lays out quite starkly.
we'll be exploring the powerful, sometimes surprising contrasts presented here, how India is being seen differently by the world, the unique demographic situation it finds itself in,
Right.
and the major efforts being made to shape its economic future.
But we won't shy away from the significant challenges that these sources point to, which provide a crucial balance, really, to the more optimistic view.
Definitely need that balance.
Think of this deep dive as your shortcut to being well informed on this topic, straight from the material you shared. It's about getting right to those aha moments, understanding the key dynamics,
hmm
and grasping the perspectives and challenges outlined in this material.
Yeah, it's not just about facts and figures, but about the narrative, and I suppose the counter-narrative that this source material itself constructs. So let's jump in.
Let's do it. The very first major theme that leaps out from this source material, sort of setting the stage for everything else, is the significant shift in global perception regarding India's economic status
Right.
and the characteristics that define this emerging idea of New India.
And the core of that shift, as the source describes it, is the transformation from being seen, perhaps for a long time, as a third world developing country.
A term you heard a lot.
Yeah, to now being firmly placed in the category of an emerging economy.
That change in status is more than just a new label, isn't it? The source emphasizes its significance.
It really does.
It signals, according to the material, an economy that possesses great potential for accelerating growth.
Potential for growth. Yeah.
And importantly for the global economy, it actively offers investment opportunities. This isn't just an internal shift, it's about external engagement.
And what's particularly fascinating here, and a point the source highlights, is how the global view of India's massive population is being reframed.
Hmm.
Historically, a large population was often perceived primarily as a burden or a challenge for development.
Sure, the sheer numbers.
But the source explains that this perspective is changing. India's population is increasingly being recognized not just as a large number of people, but as a potent source of demand.
A source of demand. And this recognition has a profound implication, according to the source.
It does.
By viewing its population as a source of demand, India positions itself, in the source's words, as the second largest potential market in the world after China.
That's huge. That's a dramatic reevaluation of a fundamental national characteristic, shifting it from a potential liability, maybe,
Right.
to a significant economic asset in the eyes of investors and global observers.
And the source also places this transformation within a broader global context. It points out India's prominence within the BRICS economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa,
The BRICS bloc, yeah.
noting that many international reports frequently project future decades belonging in large part to this bloc.
You see that referenced a lot.
It even goes further, mentioning other countries like Indonesia, South Korea, Vietnam, and Taiwan, suggesting that these nations, too, could experience a similar upward shift in status.
So it's part of a wider trend, potentially.
And the combined effect of these shifts, particularly the rise of India and the BRICS economies, is presented by the source as potentially leading to a gradual shift in the global economy itself.
Right, a rebalancing. So the implication drawn by the source from this changing status is quite significant. It suggests that this rise questions the supremacy today of the first world countries.
A direct challenge.
It implies, as the source explicitly states, a larger say in global matters, sharing at global platforms and global recognition for this emerging new India.
It's a narrative of increasing global economic and political influence, really directly linked to this economic transformation described here.
Exactly.
Moving on from the shift in global standing, the source describes another key projection for New India, the ambition of becoming a knowledge economy.
A knowledge economy. And the reason cited in the material for this potential is rooted in existing strength. The sheer number of millions of knowledge hubs that already dot the country.
So the infrastructure's there, or the beginnings of it.
That's what the source suggests, yeah. That this infrastructure provides a fertile ground for developing a knowledge-based economy.
And the source mentions that the government has actively pursued this ambition, specifically citing the setting up of the Knowledge Commission of India
Right.
for developing strategies for global knowledge to reside in the country. This indicates a deliberate policy focus on attracting and fostering knowledge industries.
So, based purely on the premise presented in the source,
Mhm.
this focus on becoming a knowledge economy suggests an aspiration to shift the economic base towards sectors driven by intellectual capital, research, innovation, high-value services, that sort of thing.
Moving up the value chain.
Exactly. It's about positioning India not just as, say, a manufacturing hub, but as a leader in global knowledge creation and application. That seems to be the goal described.
Another unique and defining feature of New India, highlighted by the source, is its status as a young economy.
Yeah, this is a big one. This is grounded in specific demographic data. The source points out that India has over 50% of its population under 25 years of age.
Wow, 50% under 25.
Or, looking slightly wider, 70% of the population under 35 years. These are incredibly young demographics for such a large nation.
And the source emphasizes that this demographic profile makes India unique or the only country in the world in this particular regard.
Really stands out.
It's presented as a truly distinctive characteristic that sets India apart on the global stage.
And this characteristic is contrasted sharply with a major trend observed globally, which the source highlights. An aging workforce, increased longevity leading to large proportion of non-working to working population globally.
Which we see in many developed countries.
Right, and increased investment in social security for the aging population. While many developed and even some developing nations grapple with the challenges of an aging population, India, according to the source, has the opposite situation. It's got this youth bulge.
The potential benefit of this young population, as identified by the source, is enormous. India can reap the benefits of favorable demographic dividends.
The dividend.
This means a large, growing pool of working-age people, which, if properly utilized, could fuel productivity, innovation, consumption for decades, really.
It's presented as a powerful engine for economic growth, potentially.
However, and this is a point the source makes very clearly, isn't it? This demographic advantage is not automatic. It comes with a crucial caveat.
A very important one. The source states that reaping these benefits requires harnessing this young population through extensive and intensive education and stress on skill development.
Education and skills. This is a vital condition presented by the source. Without significant investment in education and skill building, this large young population could become a challenge, maybe even a liability rather than an advantage.
Absolutely. It frames education and skills as the necessary bridge to translate demographic potential into economic opportunity.
Otherwise, the source warns, India, from a position of strength in these advantages, can be taken over by other emerging economies who are maybe better able to develop their human capital.
A real risk highlighted there. Finally, the source refers to India as evolving towards a market economy.
Okay, what does that mean according to the material?
Well, according to the source, this means that economic decisions of production and pricing are largely through market forces of demand and supply rather than the government.
So a shift away from central control.
It indicates a move away from centrally planned or heavily controlled economic models towards one where supply and demand play the primary role in determining prices and production levels, for the most part.
But not entirely.
No. And the source is careful to point out that this isn't a complete laissez-faire system. It provides specific examples where government regulation still significantly impacts pricing and production.
Like what?
These include the pricing of food grains, minimum support price, retail petroleum goods like LPG, kerosene and diesel, administered price mechanism, fertilizers, group retention price scheme, and other utilities. So key areas remain regulated.
Got it. But the source notes that pricing for the remaining products are market determined.
Right.
And includes the economic principle that prices determined through the market are said to be efficient.
So the implication here, as presented in the source, is a stated direction towards leveraging market forces for greater efficiency across large parts of the economy.
But with caveats.
Exactly, while acknowledging that certain essential sectors or goods remain under government oversight, reflecting a sort of hybrid approach.
Okay, to quickly recap this first major section then, the source paints a picture of New India characterized by a fundamental shift in global status towards an emerging economy,
Mhm.
a strategic ambition to become a knowledge economy, the significant advantage of a unique young economy demographic, but with that key caveat about education and skill,
Crucial caveat.
and a move towards a market economy, albeit a regulated one in parts.
And these features, according to the source, represent a transformed global perception and highlight inherent advantages for India. But the material consistently stresses that these advantages still need harnessing to become realized opportunities,
Right.
or India risks losing its competitive edge to other nations. That's a recurring theme.
Now, with that optimistic picture of New India firmly established from the source material, the narrative takes a crucial turn, a really important turn.
It does.
The source itself provides the necessary counterpoint, stating, and I'll quote directly here because it's so central to the document. However, then, in our zeal and enthusiasm, we should not forget that there is also a real India.
That's a vital reminder from the source, isn't it? Presenting a different reality that, as the material says, can gloss New India. It's the necessary balance to the narrative of growth and emergence we just discussed.
Definitely. The first feature of this real India is the sheer scale of the population it encompasses. The source describes a large population residing in 6 lakh odd villages in the country.
6 lakh villages.
Yeah.
That's over 600,000 villages. It emphasizes the vast rural heartland.
And the situation of this population is described in very stark terms. According to the source, they are completely oblivious of the new India narrative and its developments.
Completely oblivious.
They are described as living under abject, absolute poverty, undernourished, and living under pitiable conditions. This is a powerful and, frankly, unflinching depiction from the source.
It really is. The source reinforces the gravity of this reality with a very direct statement. India continues to be home to the largest number of poor people in the world.
Wow. Placing that statistic right after discussing India as a growing market and emerging economy, it just highlights the profound internal disparity the source is emphasizing.
It absolutely does. And the source includes a poignant phrase to underscore the significance of this segment of the population. While we can draw comfort of the new India, we should not forget the real India, which is where the soul of the country resides.
The soul of the country. That suggests this isn't just about economics. It's about acknowledging a fundamental part of the nation's identity and reality.
Precisely. Another defining feature of real India presented in the source is the state of the agricultural sector. It's described as traditional, subsistence, and stagnating.
Stagnating. That points to a sector that, despite the broader economic shifts we discussed in New India, remains largely characterized by, well, outdated practices,
Right.
focused merely on providing basic sustenance and not experiencing dynamic growth or modernization.
And for the large population still dependent on it, that stagnation has significant implications for their livelihoods.
The source also highlights a widespread issue of employment within this real India context. It points to a lack of employment opportunities in the economy with large-scale unemployment.
Yeah, lack of jobs. And the material provides a statistic that paints a vivid picture of the nature of work for the majority. A large proportion of the workforce of over 90% engaged in the informal sector,
Over 90% informal.
in casual work for livelihood. This implies a lack of stable, formal jobs, with most people relying on precarious, informal labor simply to survive.
It speaks to a lack of secure income, benefits, that sort of thing, for the vast majority of the workforce described here.
Exactly. And the source makes a crucial point about the disconnect between the two Indias here. It states explicitly that the increased growth of recent times as well as benefits of reforms have not touched them, meaning the population in real India.
Not touch them. The source characterizes this growth as exclusive rather than inclusive growth.
Exclusive rather than inclusive. Reiterating that powerful observation from the source, this population is presented as being completely oblivious of the fact that there is an international perspective of a new India.
They're just living a fundamentally different reality, untouched by that global narrative of India's economic rise according to this material.
That's the picture painted. And the source doesn't just present these two contrasting pictures. It clearly articulates the central challenge they create. It states very directly that the biggest challenge for the government and the economy is to integrate real with New India.
That's the core problem statement, isn't it? Derived straight from the source material.
Absolutely. It's not enough, the source implies, to drive growth in the New India sectors. The critical task is ensuring that this growth is inclusive, that its benefits reach the real India,
Right.
and that these two vastly different segments of the country can somehow be brought closer together, bridging that gap.
So with that stark contrast and the central challenge identified, the source then shifts focus to explore initiatives that are presented as efforts to address these realities, drive transformation, and potentially bridge that gap between real and new India.
Okay, the solutions or attempted solutions?
These are framed in the source as strategic reforms through policy frameworks since 2014 as government initiatives, or more broadly as new philosophies.
New philosophies. The overall aim of these initiatives, as the source frames them, is contributing to the creation of New India through the application of these new philosophies.
Leading towards what?
This is presented as leading towards transparent governance and marching towards the pinnacle of economic growth. Quite ambitious framing.
Indeed. The first initiative detailed is the Skill India campaign. The source mentions it was launched by the Prime Minister on July 15, 2015.
Skill India. Its objective, as stated in the source, is incredibly ambitious. Training over 40 crore people in the country under different skills by 2022.
40 crore. That's 400 million people targeted for skills development. A huge number.
Massive. The method described involves organizing vocational training and/or courses, which are vocational like ITI, which stands for Industrial Training Institutes, providing technical skills,
Right, the ITIs.
to uplift entrepreneurial spirit in the people by acquiring these skills.
So this ties directly back to that crucial caveat we discussed earlier about needing extensive education and skill development to truly harness India's young demographic dividend.
Exactly. The source presents Skill India as a direct response to this need identified earlier in the text.
Does it give any numbers on progress?
It does. The source provides specific metrics to illustrate the scale of this effort as of its writing, noting 3,222 training centers, over 55,070,476 trained individuals. That's over 5.5 million.
Okay.
And 23,088,009 people placed, just under 2.4 million placed in jobs. These numbers from the source give a concrete sense of the scale of the training and placement efforts underway as part of this campaign at that time.
It mentions related initiatives, too.
Yes, the source also lists several related initiatives that fall under this umbrella, reinforcing the comprehensive nature of the effort. The National Skill Development Mission, the National Policy for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship from 2015, the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana,
PMKVY.
PMKVY, yeah, which is a flagship skill development scheme, rural India skill efforts, and a skill loan scheme. So it shows a multi-pronged approach to skill building described in the material.
Okay, what's next?
Next, the source introduces the Startup India initiative, described as an action plan.
Startup India. Its primary aim, according to the source, is promoting bank financing for startup ventures to boost entrepreneurship and encourage startups with jobs creation.
So focusing on new businesses.
Right, fostering innovation and new businesses as a source of economic growth and employment. The source notes its announcement date as August 15th, 2015.
Following that is the Stand Up India scheme.
Stand Up India, what's its focus?
The source specifies its focus, promoting entrepreneurship among women and scheduled castes and tribes. This scheme is specifically targeted at empowering historically disadvantaged groups and women through entrepreneurship.
That sounds quite specific. Which ministry handles it?
The source states that this scheme is anchored by the Ministry of Finance, and it details the specific mechanism. It facilitates bank loans between 10 lakh and 1 crore.
10 lakhs to 1 crore rupees.
To at least one scheduled caste, SC, or scheduled tribe, ST borrower, and at least one woman borrower per bank branch for starting a greenfield enterprise, meaning a new venture.
Per bank branch. That's a very concrete policy mechanism aimed at promoting inclusive entrepreneurship, as described here.
Seems so. Finally, the source discusses Digital India.
Digital India, that's a big one, often talked about. How does the source describe it?
It's presented as a broad initiative aimed at ensuring government services are made available to citizens electronically.
Making government digital. And how?
The method outlined in the source is achieving this by improving online infrastructure and by increasing internet connectivity across the country. Its launch date is given as July 1st, 2015.
And the source goes into more detail.
It provides a detailed look at digital India, organizing its vision into three key components or themes, acting as a bird's-eye view of the program, as the source puts it.
Okay, what's the first theme?
The first theme is digital infrastructure as a utility to every citizen. Under this umbrella, the source includes the vision of high-speed internet access being a core utility like water or electricity.
Internet as a utility.
A unique, lifelong, online, and authenticatable digital identity from cradle to grave, ensuring every citizen has a mobile phone and bank account to enable participation in the digital and financial space, providing easy access to common service centers, which act as digital access points in rural areas,
CSCs.
offering shareable private space on a public cloud and ensuring a safe and secure cyberspace. The source clearly sees these as the foundational digital building blocks for a connected society.
Makes sense. What's the second theme?
The second theme is governance and services on demand. This vision encompasses seamlessly integrated services across different government departments and jurisdictions,
Breaking down silos.
hopefully. Making services available in real time through online and mobile platforms, ensuring all citizen entitlements are portable and available on the cloud. Digitally transforming services specifically to improve the ease of doing business.
Ease of doing business, a key metric.
Promoting electronic and cashless financial transactions, and leveraging geospatial information systems, GIS, for better decision support and development planning. This describes a vision of government being truly accessible, efficient, and data-driven through digital means, according to the source.
Okay, and the third theme?
And a third major theme is digital empowerment of citizens. This involves achieving universal digital literacy across the population.
Literacy, not just access.
Right. Ensuring universally accessible digital resources, making digital resources and services available in Indian languages to overcome language barriers, creating collaborative digital platforms for participatory governance, allowing citizens to engage more directly, and removing the requirement for citizens to physically submit government documents or certificates by digitizing processes. This part of the initiative, as presented in the source, is focused on enabling individuals to participate fully and easily in the digital and governance space.
So these three themes cover it all.
These three themes encompass what the source explicitly labels as the 9 components of Digital India program.
Got it. So these initiatives, Skill India, Startup India, Stand Up India, and Digital India, are presented in the source as key strategies driving the transformation towards New India, while implicitly serving as policy responses aimed at addressing some of the deep-seated challenges identified in real India, particularly through skills, entrepreneurship, digital access, and improved governance. That's the connection the source seems to make.
That seems to be the intention presented.
Okay. Moving beyond the initiatives, the source includes a section titled 8 Interesting Facts About India. Now, these aren't just random data points, are they?
No, they're presented against the backdrop of the broader economic picture and key policy shifts, adding layers of nuance, complexity, and sometimes directly challenging perceptions or highlighting persistent issues.
And the source sets the stage by mentioning that these facts are presented against the backdrop of robust macroeconomic stability and 2 major domestic policy developments from around that time.
Right, the big ones, GST and demonetization.
Let's touch on those briefly, just reporting what the source says. How does it describe GST?
The source describes the Goods and Services Tax, GST, as a constitutional amendment, paving the way for implementing the Transformational Goods and Services Tax, GST.
Transformational.
And the stated benefits.
It reports the stated benefits as articulated in the source itself. The intention to create a common Indian market, improve tax compliance and governance, and boost investment and growth.
Okay.
The source also highlights it as a bold new experiment in the governance of India's cooperative federalism, reflecting the federal structure of the country. Again, just relaying the source's description here. Understood. And demonetization.
Demonetization is mentioned as the action to demonetize the 2 highest denomination notes at the time. Pretty straightforward description.
And the source's assessment of it.
The source's assessment, as written here, is that it had short-term costs, but holds the potential for long-term benefits. So, acknowledging immediate difficulties while pointing to possible future advantages.
Does the source suggest any follow-up actions related to demonetization?
Yes, it does. The source lists suggested follow-up actions it believes were necessary to maximize those potential long-term benefits and mitigate the costs.
Such as?
These include calls for fast, demand-driven remonetization, further tax reforms like bringing land and real estate into the GST, reducing tax rates and stamp duties, and importantly, acting to allay anxieties about overzealous tax administration. These are presented in the source as crucial next steps needed at that point.
Interesting. And it connects this to broader challenges.
It does. Looking even further ahead, the source adds that post-demonization, societal shifts in ideas and narratives will be needed to overcome three long-standing meta-challenges.
Meta-challenges, what are they?
These deep-rooted issues are identified by the source as inefficient redistribution, ambivalence about the private sector and property rights, and improving but still challenged state capacity.
So fundamental issues.
Right. The source views demonetization as potentially forcing a reckoning with these fundamental issues.
And the source concludes this framing segment how?
It concludes by stating that articulating and embracing those ideational shifts will be critical to ensuring that India's sweet spot is enduring, not evanescent.
India's sweet spot, enduring, not evanescent. That's a powerful phrase. It seems to refer to the potential and advantages embodied by New India.
That seems right.
And the source is emphatically stating that addressing these deeper societal and governmental challenges is absolutely key to making that potential lasting and not just fleeting.
Exactly. A strong warning embedded there. Okay, let's dive into the 8 specific facts, starting with fact number 1, which the source titles, Indians on the Move.
Indians on the move. What's the finding here?
This finding is based on new estimates derived from railway passenger traffic data, revealing a significant annual work-related migration of about 9 million people within India.
9 million people migrating for work annually based on railway data. How does that compare to other estimates?
Well, the striking aspect of this fact, as the source points out, is that this figure is almost double what the 2011 census suggests for internal migration.
Double the census figure. That's a huge difference.
It is. This discrepancy is significant because it implies that the scale of internal labor migration in India might be far greater than previously captured by traditional data sources like the census.
So potentially a much more dynamic movement of people seeking work within the country than we thought.
That's what the source suggests, yeah.
Yeah.
A key aspect of the economy that might have been significantly underestimated based on this data point.
Okay, fact number 2 is titled Biases in Perception, and the source uses international credit ratings to illustrate this.
Right. The source presents a comparison. China was upgraded by a major credit rating agency to AA in December 2010, while India remained at BBB.
BBB, which is several notches lower, isn't it? Just above junk status.
Correct. The source then juxtaposes this with credit to GDP data from 2009 to 2015. During this period, China's credit to GDP ratio soared dramatically from approximately 142% to 205%.
Wow, a huge jump in debt relative to GDP.
Yes, and its growth decelerated during that time. India's ratio, in contrast, rose much more moderately, from about 70% to 75%, while its growth, the source notes, was well above China during the same period.
So China's debt balloons, growth slows, rating goes up. India's debt is more stable, growth is faster, rating stays low.
That's the contrast presented. The source's point in presenting this data is explicit. This contrast with India's indicators is striking, and according to the source, strongly suggests biases in perception on the part of external rating agencies.
So the source is using this comparison to question whether the lower rating for India accurately reflected its credit trajectory and growth performance, especially relative to China at that time.
That's exactly how it's framed in the material, yes.
Okay, fact number 3 provides new evidence on weak targeting of social programs. We touched on inclusion earlier.
We did. The core issue highlighted here is that welfare spending in India suffers from misallocation, meaning funds intended for social programs are not effectively reaching the neediest populations, according to this evidence.
Misallocation. How bad is it?
The specific and incredibly stark detail provided by the source is that the districts with the most poor are the ones that suffer from the greatest shortfall of funds in social programs.
Wait, the poorest districts get the least funding proportionally.
That's what the source states. It isn't just general misallocation. It's described as a systemic issue where the areas with the highest concentration of poverty are receiving the least amount of help relative to their need.
Is there a specific statistic?
Yes. The source quantifies this issue. The districts accounting for the poorest 40% receive 29% of the total funding allocated to these programs.
Poorest 40% get only 29% of the funds. That figure, straight from the source, serves as pretty concrete evidence for the claim of weak targeting and misallocation.
It certainly seems to. And it directly relates back to our earlier discussion of real India
Hmm.
and highlights a significant barrier potentially to achieving that crucial inclusive growth the source mentioned.
Definitely connects those dots. Fact number 4 is framed intriguingly as political democracy, but fiscal democracy. What does that mean?
The statistic presented here is that India has 7 taxpayers for every 100 voters.
7 taxpayers per 100 voters. How does that compare internationally?
The source provides international context, noting this ratio ranks India 13th amongst 18 of our democratic G20 peers, so quite low among peers.
So, by pairing political democracy, which implies broad participation through voting, with fiscal democracy, and this specific statistic, what's the implication?
The source seems to be highlighting a relatively narrow base of direct taxpayers compared to the size of the electorate. This raises questions within the source's framework about the distribution of the tax burden, the extent of formal economic participation, and potentially the capacity of the state reliant on this tax base.
Interesting framing. Fact number 5 revisits the theme of demographics, but adds a nuance titled India's Distinctive Demographic Dividend. How is it distinctive?
Well, while we know India has a young population, the source elaborates on its specific trajectory compared to other nations. It explains that India's share of the working-age population relative to the non-working-age population will peak later and at a lower level than that for other countries, but last longer.
Okay, so the peak impact might be less intense than in some other countries, but it's spread over a longer period.
That's the idea presented.
Hmm.
But crucially, the source notes the timing of this peak.
Okay.
The peak of the growth boost due to the demographic dividend is fast approaching.
Fast approaching, so the window of opportunity is limited.
That's the implication. It also adds a significant regional detail. Peninsular states peaking soon, and the hinterland states peaking much later.
So it's not uniform across the country.
No. This internal variation means different parts of the country will experience their demographic peak at different times, presenting complex challenges for synchronized national policies like skill development and job creation we talked about earlier.
That makes sense. Fact number 6 presents a surprising comparison. India trades more than China and a lot within itself. More than China.
That's what the source claims, looking at openness, defined as the ratio of total trade in goods and services to GDP, using data from 2011.
And the finding?
The finding, presented as counterintuitive perhaps, is that India's openness has far overtaken China's, a country famed for using trade as an engine of growth.
Really, overtaken China on that metric. That data point from the source challenges the common perception, maybe, that China is significantly more integrated into global trade relative to the size of its economy than India.
It seems designed to challenge that perception, yes. The source also adds the point about internal trade, noting that India's internal trade to GDP is also comparable to that of other large countries.
Comparable internally, too.
And it specifically pushes back against the caricature of a barrier-riddled economy, using this data to suggest that internal trade flows are robust, contradicting a potential common perception of significant domestic trade hurdles.
Interesting data point. Now, fact number 7 highlights a major internal challenge. Divergence within India, big time. What kind of divergence?
The finding here is that spatial dispersion in income is still rising in India in the last decade, 2004-14, meaning the income gap between different geographical regions or areas within India was actually increasing during this period.
Increasing regional inequality. How does that compare globally?
This trend is contrasted by the source with what was happening unlike the rest of the world and even China, where spatial income inequalities were generally decreasing or stabilizing during that time.
So India was moving against a global trend towards regional income convergence.
According to this source, yes. It's emphasizing that divergence was growing.
And the source's conclusion on this?
Its conclusion on this finding is particularly significant. It states that despite more porous borders within India than between countries internationally, the forces of convergence have been elusive.
That's a striking paradox. Even within a single nation, with relatively free movement compared to international borders, economic activity and income are becoming more, not less, concentrated in certain areas.
That's the paradox highlighted. And it directly links back, of course, to the challenge of inclusive growth and that disconnect between new and real India we discussed.
It really underscores that challenge. Okay, finally, fact number 8 points to property tax potential unexploited. How do they know this?
The interesting aspect here is the source of evidence cited. satellite data.
Using satellites to assess property tax potential.
Apparently, the specific examples provided based on this satellite data are that major cities like Bengaluru and Jaipur collect only between 5% to 20% of their potential property taxes.
Only 5 to 20% of the potential? That's incredibly low.
It is. This fact highlights, as presented in the source, a significant source of potential revenue that is not being fully utilized. It points at inefficiencies in local government tax collection and administration,
Right.
potentially impacting the resources available for urban development and services.
And this connects back to one of those meta challenges mentioned earlier, improving but still challenged state capacity.
Exactly. It suggests that capacity issues exist even at the local level in harnessing available resources, based on the specific example from the source.
Okay, so pulling all of this together, we've covered the two distinct, sometimes conflicting pictures presented in your source material.
Yeah, quite a journey through it. On one hand, the dynamic emerging narrative of New India, characterized by its changing global status, demographic advantages, knowledge economy ambitions, and move towards a market orientation.
And on the other hand, the persistent challenging reality described as real India, grappling with widespread rural poverty, a stagnant agricultural sector, a vast informal workforce, and a stark disconnect from the benefits of recent growth,
Right.
leading to what the source calls exclusive rather than inclusive development.
And, crucially, both of these perspectives are presented side by side within the source material you shared, emphasizing that understanding India, according to this text, requires acknowledging both realities simultaneously.
We've also explored the initiatives discussed in the source, such as Skill India, Startup India, Stand Up India, and Digital India. These are presented as the government's strategic efforts, the new philosophies aimed at driving transformation, fostering entrepreneurship, building skills, and improving governance and access,
Right, the policy responses.
with the implicit goal of addressing some of the challenges seen in real India and supporting the growth of New India.
But then we layered on the 8 interesting facts. And these weren't just dry statistics, were they? They added crucial nuance and highlighted complexities.
Go.
They provided concrete evidence, according to the source, for issues like vast underestimated internal migration, potential biases and external perceptions, significant misallocation of funds and social programs, a narrow tax base relative to voters,
The list goes on.
the specific timing and regional variation of the demographic dividend, surprising data on trade openness, and that worrying trend of increasing income divergence within the country, alongside unexploited local revenue potential.
And these facts, particularly the misallocation of funds and the increasing internal divergence, directly challenge the idea that the growth and initiatives are smoothly translating into inclusive development for everyone, don't they?
They certainly seem to. They reinforce the tension between the new and the real India that the source emphasizes throughout.
So why does understanding this complex picture, as presented in these specific sources, matter to you, our listener? Why go through all this detail?
Well, it's valuable because it offers a powerful, multifaceted case study that goes beyond simple headlines, doesn't it?
It really does. It's a deep dive into the reality of rapid economic change in a large, diverse nation. It illustrates the profound potential and simultaneous challenges associated with significant demographic shifts, like India's young population.
And it highlights the inherent difficulties in achieving truly inclusive growth, where the benefits of economic progress actually reach all segments of society. That's a global challenge, really.
Absolutely. And it demonstrates how different metrics and sources of data, from national economic figures and international ratings to specific program funding statistics, internal migration patterns revealed by railway data, even satellite data on property taxes, can paint varied, sometimes contrasting, pictures of the same complex economy.
Yeah, you need all those pieces to get a fuller picture. Understanding this dynamic helps you appreciate the nuances when reading about global economic trends and the development paths of large emerging economies.
It's about grasping that official narratives, while often highlighting real progress, need to be considered alongside the on-the-ground realities and specific data points that reveal persistent challenges, as laid out here.
It provides context for understanding the policy choices being made and the sheer scale of the task involved in governing and developing a country as vast and diverse as India.
Absolutely. So we've journeyed through this source material, uncovering the ambitious transformation narrative of New India, the fundamental persistent challenges of real India, the policy efforts presented as attempts to bridge that gap, and the vital, sometimes surprising facts that add layers of complexity and highlight the ongoing struggles for inclusive growth and effective governance, all as seen through the lens of this material.
It's a picture, really, of immense potential existing alongside deep-seated issues, with the path forward, as this source frames it, defined by that challenge of integration.
Right. And based strictly on the themes, the evidence, and the core tension presented within this specific source material, that stark contrast between the new India narrative and the persistent challenges of the real India, and those specific facts highlighting issues like misallocated resources and social programs and increasing internal divergence in income. Here's a final thought for you to ponder, drawn directly from the heart of this material.
Okay.
Given the source identifies integrating the real and new India as the biggest challenge and highlights how things like unequal resource distribution and growing internal income gaps persist, what specific aspect or perhaps combination of aspects discussed in these sources do you think represents the most critical obstacle India must overcome to truly ensure that its potential, its sweet spot, as the source terms it, translates into tangible, enduring benefits for everyone it describes, from the urban emerging sectors to the rural poor?
Hmm. That's a question that the source material itself seems to pose implicitly through its juxtaposition of realities and facts. Where's the biggest blockage?
Indeed. It leaves you thinking about where the true leverage points and biggest hurdles lie, based on what we've discussed from these pages. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Indian economy, guided by the sources you shared.
We hope you've gained a clearer and perhaps more nuanced understanding of the picture presented in that material.
And we look forward to our next deep dive into the interesting topics and sources you bring to us. Until then.